Welcome to this special edition of One Foot in the Past, celebrating the genius of the world's first modern engineer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel's vision, more than anyone's, shifted the Western world from a rural to an industrial way of life in the first half of the 19th century. We trace the rise of the grandest railway ever created, the Great Western, the building of an iron cathedral fit for the new steam age, Paddington Station. And Dan Cruikshank celebrates the muscular heroism of Brunel's mighty Royal Albert Bridge. For 3 centuries, the genius of structural engineering lay dormant. Not since the building of the great medieval cathedrals had the potential of material and structure moved forward. Gavin Stamp marks the birth of a new age.
Isambard Kingdom Brunel is the engineer's hero. He remains a towering figure, a visionary, a man who built for his own time, but also for the future. For him, nothing was impossible. This is the structure that made his name, the Clifton Suspension Bridge.
He was only 24 when he won a competition to span the Avon Gorge in 1831. Other engineers claimed it couldn't be done, that the span was too wide, the bridge too high to be safe. But throughout his life, Brunel ignored tradition and sought out the limits of what engineering could offer in terms of grandeur, speed and comfort.
The years after the Napoleonic Wars were extraordinary, a time of political instability, religious fervour and intense activity, and the best possible time to be an engineer. That supreme product of the Industrial Revolution, the steam railway, was crossing the land, and a new breed of engineer arose to create massive works on a scale not seen since the Romans. Of these, Brunel was the most ambitious and the most glamorous.
He was arrogant, conceited and domineering, but he was also an original genius whose dreams of glory laid the foundations of the modern world of high-speed travel. Bristol is central to the Brunel story. The city's merchants had the courage to back his enterprises, and Brunel did his best for Bristol. He connected the city to London by the fastest railway in the world, and he designed ships that could have made Bristol a rival to Liverpool as the port for America. The line from London to Bristol, promoted in 1835, was one of the first great trunk railway lines, and Brunel wanted it to be the finest work in England.
The Great Western was different. Stephenson and the other engineers built lines with the rails placed a mere 4 foot 8.5 inches apart. Brunel would have nothing to do with this coal wagon gauge. He wanted to achieve much higher speeds, much greater stability, and have far larger carriages. So he placed his rails 7 feet apart, the broad gauge.
Pulled by the superb engines designed by Daniel Gooch, with their 8-foot diameter single driving wheels, Great Western trains in the 1840s achieved average speeds of over 50 miles an hour, much higher than anything running on narrow gauge lines. It took only 2.5 hours from London to Bristol, and Brunel imagined a time when the ride would be so smooth that a cup of coffee could be drunk without spilling it. The other reason why the Great Western could achieve such astonishing speed so early was the sheer excellence of the line Brunel created. Great earthworks, bridges and viaducts enabled it to have gentle curves and very few steep gradients. Obstacles were effortlessly overcome, and with elegance. The Thames was repeatedly crossed by brick arches with flat elliptical spans the critics were convinced would fall. They stand yet. At Sunning, the line was carried in a cutting 60 feet deep and almost 2 miles long.
Between Chippenham and Bath, a hill was in the way. Rather than take the railway round it, Brunel naturally went straight through it, with a tunnel almost 2 miles long, the Box Tunnel, the longest railway tunnel yet attempted.
Brunel's critics described it as monstrous and extraordinary, dangerous and impracticable. It took 5 years to excavate, and 100 men lost their lives boring through solid rock. But it was typical of Brunel to go for the best and most dramatic solution, rather than the cheapest.
The portal of the Box Tunnel is a product of the heroic age of railway architecture. Its scale is huge, but it is sublime, not brutal. Brunel took his railway across England with elegance and tact. He united engineering and architecture, and he could bridge the gulf between art and science. The first trains from London reached Bristol in 1841 and arrived here in this great shed at Temple Meads. There were 5 broad gauge tracks across here, arrivals on that platform, departures on the other. This superb iron and timber roof has a clear span of 72 foot, wider than Westminster Hall. This is the grandest and most sophisticated of early railway stations, the first cathedral of the railway age.
Bristol was never the end of the line. The Great Western went on to Exeter, Plymouth and Penzance, to Cardiff and South Wales, and even to Birkenhead. But Brunel's imagination went much further, across the Atlantic. At an early meeting of the directors of the railway, someone worried about the immense length of it. "Why not make it longer," retorted Brunel, "and have a steamboat go from Bristol to New York and call it the Great Western?" By being bigger than any previous ship, the Great Western proved it was possible to steam across the Atlantic without running out of coal. He clearly saw the way naval architecture was to develop.
The Great Britain was Brunel's second steamship. Designed for the Atlantic crossing and launched in 1843, she was of supreme importance in the history of shipbuilding. The Great Britain was the first modern ship in that she combined 3 key elements for the first time. She was made of iron, she was driven by a screw propeller rather than paddle wheels, and she was big, the biggest ship in the world. The Great Britain is built of iron because a wooden ship simply couldn't be this long. Furthermore, Brunel ignored traditional shipbuilding practice and built her like an iron bridge. This box girder structure in the bottom of the hull is what makes the ship so very strong, and that is why she has survived. Because of her size, the Great Britain set new standards in comfort for transatlantic ships. This is a reconstruction of the first-class dining saloon.
The fastest and most reliable of passenger ships, she pioneered a revolution in ship design. But sometimes Brunel was too far ahead of his time. The Great Eastern, a colossal iron ship designed for the Australia run, suffered an explosion on her maiden voyage. Brunel's critics accused him of extravagance, of over-ambition, of impracticality, and they were right. Not only were there teething troubles with all his projects, the necessary consequence of innovation, but he also made several huge and costly mistakes. And the broad gauge could not survive in isolation. The last tracks were converted to the standard British gauge in 1892.
In the long term, Brunel was right. He was building for the future, for centuries hence. The French understand this. The TGV lines they are building all over Europe to take trains at 200 miles an hour are in the tradition of Brunel. How pathetic are our own pygmy successors to the great British railway builders, mediocrities who cannot even build a line from the Channel Tunnel to London. In the land that gave railways to the world, this is shaming.
Paddington Terminus, completed in 1854, is Brunel's finest station. It was here that he constructed the first high-tech shed, and with it the concept of Britain's first fully integrated station complex. Although it's hard to imagine now, the idea of the station had to be invented from scratch. And it is Brunel who is largely responsible for what we now think of as the modern station. Trains had been stopping at Paddington for 13 years before Brunel came to build his station. But the original terminus at Bishop's Road, like most of the early railway buildings, was a very basic affair. Brunel's design for a great shed at Paddington had to embody not only the grandeur and ambition of his railway, but be a fitting gateway for the journey which could go all the way to New York. Brunel planned his buildings around the limitations of the site, a cutting in a semi-rural area on the outskirts of London. He called it a station after my own fancy, admitting of no exterior, all interior and all roofed in. It's impossible to get any sense of the size of the station from the outside. And from the front, all you can see is the facade of the Great Western Royal Hotel, wrapped around Brunel's grand station. Only from the hotel's roof can you see the structure of his original triple-span shed, inspired by Joseph Paxton's great glass roofs at Crystal Palace. Brunel's structure lasted perfectly well for 60 years, but in 1915 a fourth span was added because of the sheer volume of traffic. Brunel borrowed heavily from Paxton's technique of component construction developed at Crystal Palace. Sadly, almost all of Brunel's ridge and furrow glazing has been replaced, but one small section has recently been restored, giving a good impression of the greenhouse-like quality of the original roof. Inside, however, the great cast-iron ribs supporting the roof are Brunel's. Steel columns have replaced Brunel's original cast-iron ones, but his use of columns to support these massive roof arches allowed for maximum freedom in arranging this vast interior. This flexibility has allowed Paddington to adapt from the original 4 platforms to now 14, yet surviving much as Brunel intended. Passengers would enter via the booking office and be streamed into their first, second or third class waiting rooms, unless of course you happen to be a member of the royal family, in which case this is where you'd wait. In Queen Victoria's day, this room had pink and grey silk walls and gilded French furniture. Nowadays, you don't have to be royal to get in. A first-class ticket will do nicely. Brunel delegated the decoration of Paddington to his friend Matthew Digby Wyatt, who chose a Moorish design, backward-looking and yet oddly modernistic, predicting the curves of Art Nouveau. Together, they let their high-tech materials, glass, cast iron and cement, display themselves, rather than disguising the engineering as Brunel had done with his neo-Tudor roof at Bristol Temple Meads. Increasingly fascinated by the relationship between form and function, Brunel used Paddington Station to experiment. His columns not only supported the roof, but carried rainwater ducts to drains beneath the platforms. Even the decorative stars and planets were designed to take scaffolding poles supporting maintenance platforms, which allowed access to clean and repair the roof. In 1854, when Paddington Station opened, only astronomers, navigators and railway timetables used Greenwich Mean Time. The rest of the country used local time dictated by the parish clock, a minute faster for every 10 miles travelled east of London, slower for every 10 miles west. Conversion tables were published so that travellers could set their watches by London time before departing. But the high proportion of missed trains was a significant factor in getting Greenwich Mean Time adopted nationwide in 1880. Brunel was so far ahead of his time that his vision of an integrated transport system even included a prototype motor rail. He designed a system of turntables which allowed passengers' carriages to be loaded onto trucks at the rear of the train and transported with them to the West Country. People could even stay seated in their own carriages if they chose. Ironically, motor rail was axed earlier this year, a victim of cutbacks which were unimaginable in the booming days of Brunel's GWR. To this day, the entrance behind me is still known as the Horse's Arch. There's direct access from the back of Brunel Station to the Great Western Royal Hotel, designed by Philip Hardwick, son of the architect of the Euston Arch. Brunel took a close interest in the hotel's development and later became chairman of its board, realizing that the success of its integrated transport system relied on supplying the passengers' every need. Like the station, the hotel was amazingly technologically advanced. There were telephone lines to every room, and a pneumatic tube took messages to the kitchen and to the telegraph room. It was the biggest hotel in the country, with 112 bedrooms and 15 sitting rooms, and a magnificent coffee room where you could get a 3-course meal for 3 shillings. Sadly, Hardwick's interiors were all lost in a drastic refurbishment in the 1930s. Brunel's legacy at Paddington is as much in the social change he engineered as in the fabric of the building itself. He may not be able to take credit for all innovation in railway design, but station architecture has influenced many things we now take for granted. There were no public lavatories until the railways invented them. There was no such thing as the pub bar until the railway refreshment room developed the counter as a means of serving several customers at once. Brunel might not recognise every aspect of his beloved Paddington, but his design has weathered well. However, the past does have a habit of catching up with the present. Although there is no reason why structurally Paddington should not last another 150 years, there are occasional operating problems. Underneath the old taxi ranks here on platform 12, water seepages have been analysed and found to contain an unusually high proportion of horse urine. Even with all his extraordinary foresight, it's doubtful Brunel could have predicted that half a century of horse-drawn cabs would still be haunting his station 140 years later.
They're ruins now, these great big granite blocks towering up into the sky, used a lot by the birds. The swallows at the end of summer wheel around them. They add to the tranquility, the look of the place. And without them, it would just be a different place. It's just magical.
These are the remains of Brunel's great Moors Water Viaduct, built in 1858. The Gothic towers carried the Cornwall Railway, later to become the Great Western, over the East Lou River Valley near Liskeard in Cornwall. Now just 6 piers remain of the original 14. In its day, Moors Water was a magnificent structure, gracefully curving across the valley, its granite piers topped with slender fan-shaped timbers, carrying the track at a height of 147 feet. This was the most spectacular of 43 viaducts designed by Brunel to carry the railway over rivers and estuaries between Plymouth and Penzance. The common factor in all of these was the use of timber, a cheap alternative to full masonry arches at a time when the railway was expanding so quickly it had to economise. But the problem with timber was it didn't last. All the mainline Cornish viaducts had to be replaced within 50 years of their construction. Brunel's structure at Moors Water lasted just 22 years. But its thick-set Romanesque replacement built alongside is hardly a worthy successor to the earlier, delicate structure. Today, the heroic quality of Brunel's work has almost vanished, but at Viaduct Cottage, it is his vision that lives on.
The towers are all part and parcel
Yeah.
of the cottage itself. There's character in the cottage, there's character in the towers. It's we love it, we really do.
The bridge in the foreground is the Royal Albert Bridge at Saltash, linking Devon with Cornwall across the mighty River Tamar. To me, this bridge represents the pinnacle of Brunel's achievement. Completed 1859, this bridge ushered in the new age of raw and muscular engineering. This is the first great modern bridge. Its design completely expressive of its function. Here there are no classical pilasters, no Gothic tracery. This is engineering liberated from the past. Even today, juxtaposed against the Tamar suspension bridge built in 1961, Brunel's structure looks daring. Brunel's commission stipulated that the bridge must be economical and quick to build and allow tall sailing ships to pass underneath. He chose Saltash for its narrow gorge, 1,100 feet, and because the river bottom was rocky, allowing for solid foundations. This is the top of a mighty pier that rises 95 feet from the rock of the river bottom. The construction of this incredible object is the key to the whole of the bridge. It's made out of granite. I can see that's incredibly good condition. The pointing's fine, the granite's fine. It is quite fantastic. Never before had a bridge pier been constructed at such a depth below water. The big problem was to create dry working conditions at the riverbed. In May 1854, a giant prefabricated cast iron cylinder with a domed chamber at its base was sunk vertically. Workmen passed through airlocks to reach the 4-foot wide pressurized cells at the bottom. Conditions were appalling, and workmen suffered the agonies of the bends on ascent. The pier took 2.5 years to build. And above this pier rise the 4 octagonal cast iron columns which carry the deck of the bridge. Granite pier and cast iron columns together rise an amazing 200 feet from the river bottom. The great spans were fabricated here on the Devon side of the Tamar. Timber piles would have been driven into this mud, timber decking spread across here, and machinery installed. 200 or 300 men would have toiled here almost round the clock. Steam hammers going, steam engines, hammers on anvil, bang, bang, bang. The great span was then launched like a ship into the water onto pontoons. The pontoons then carried the trusses into the river, anchored them below the site they had to be jacked up to, and eventually, gradually, the spans went up into their final position. Amazed at the spectacle of the great curved spans, crowds flocked to the opening in 1859. Nothing like Saltash had ever been seen before. The spans are formed out of 4 main components. There's the tubular arch, the suspension chain, the horizontal decking, and the vertical and cross bracing. The giant arches, both 455 feet wide, are hollow and made of wrought iron plates riveted together. Brunel used wrought iron rather than cast iron because it is strong but relatively light. But although strong, the arches also threaten the stability of the structure because their massive outward thrust would push the piers of the bridge apart. This thrust is restrained by the wrought iron suspension chains made up of 20-foot long straight links. Arch and chain share the load of the deck and the train moving over it, whose weight is distributed evenly by the vertical and cross bracing. With the span stabilized in this ingenious way, the piers of the bridge only bear the downward weight, with no element of outward thrust at all. From a distance, the bridge reveals exactly how it works. But close up, you can really see and understand the different elements. I'm on the bridge, it's dawn. It's a rare opportunity to inspect this most amazing construction.
This is a section of the great wrought iron suspension chain which partly carries the deck and the train, also with restrains the thrust of the great tubular arch above us. We can see that it's a chain, but it's a very strange chain. It's made of these very large wrought iron links that connect here, going right back to this point. I mean, it's a long link, and there's over a dozen of them. Massively strong, and also flexible. That's how the bridge works in a way. You know, it takes the strain of the train by bending with it, going with it. Flexible construction.
But the weight of 125 high-speed trains has proved too much. All around me was evidence of later strengthening.
So here we have the Brunel wrought iron vertical connector. So this is all wrought with rivets and it's extraordinary fixing detail. And then it's easy to tell the new stuff, the 20th century additions. We look over here, because of course they're all bolted on, nuts and bolts. Great nut here, very different steel, wrought iron, fixed quite crudely. And then this carriage bolted onto Brunel's platework there, and this massive bolt holding this, and of course one out there as well. So the single Brunel is now been doubled up, so 3 elements doing the work of one original.
Colin Wood has worked on the bridge for 57 years.
No, those bracelets going across the centre?
Yeah.
That's not Brunel. That's been replaced since the heavy loads.
So virtually every part of Brunel's structure has been doubled up, hasn't it?
Yes, there's the 125s and all that come out of heavy freight trains.
Exactly. But it kind of interesting, is it, to identify the Brunel, everything that's riveted is Brunel, all the nuts and bolts are later.
Yeah.
The later stuff is steel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Columns which support
This was Brunel's last major land-based project. He died in 1859, the year in which the bridge was completed. Just a few months from death, yet determined to view his masterpiece, Brunel was shunted slowly across the bridge on an open platform truck. On his back, a bed-bound invalid, shattered and exhausted at the age of 53. In this bridge, in its minimal and functional form, Brunel had glimpsed the future.
Please visit our website for news about new productions that are on the way, and you can support my work on my Patreon page. Thank you.